One simply cannot discuss popular culture without the existence of witches. From the first appearance in the Bible, to the Wizard of Oz, and every Halloween, they're a classic monster to avoid, or a being to worship, depending on one's view. While witches may no longer resemble common stereotypes, the art of Wicca is still a very common practice to this day in many areas around the world. Kicking us off in 5th place, we have Tituba, one of the first women to be accused of witchcraft during the Salem witch trials of 1692 to 93. It is believed that she was taken from her tribe and forced into slavery in Barbados, where she learned her skills in witchcraft from mistresses and other slaves. When the head of her plantation passed, she was inherited by Minister Samuel Parris and was then brought to Salem, Massachusetts. Tituba was accused of practicing witchcraft by a young woman, Abigail Williams and Elizabeth Parris, who also happened to be the daughter of her owner. The girls had been showing signs of being bewitched, and it was believed that Tituba told the girls tales of voodoo and witchcraft prior to said accusations. A neighbor of the Parris family, Mary Sibley, recommended a witch's cake be baked to reveal the names of the witches, and instructed Tituba to bake a rye cake with the victim's urine and feed the cake to a dog. Dogs were believed to support witches and their supernatural powers by following the witch's requests. When the symptoms shown by the young woman did not pass, this was shown as evidence that Tituba possessed the powers of witchcraft. She was allowed to speak in court, becoming the first person to confess to practicing witchcraft in Salem in March of 1962. She also confessed to speaking with the devil, stating that he ordered her to worship him and hurt the children of the village, along with discussing tales of black dogs, hogs, a yellow bird, red and black rats, cats, a fox, and a wolf that she had cursed. She was sent to jail in Boston to await trial and punishment on March 7, eventually stuck in jail until being sold to an unknown person for the price of her jail fees that Samuel had refused to pay. Coming in 4th, Moll Dyer, one of the witches that inspired the Blair Witch Project. Residing in Leonardtown, Maryland, her origins are clouded in mystery, the most popular theory being that she was a noblewoman escaping an unsavory past. Taking up an isolated residence outside of town limits, she developed a reputation as a skilled herbalist. Those skills, combined with her unknown past and secluded lifestyle, planted the suspicion of witchcraft in villagers' heads. In the winter of 1697, the weather was so harsh that many crops failed, and a deadly plague swept through the town. It is believed that these were revenge from Moll, after the townspeople had been blaming her for every misfortune and hardship they faced. A meeting was held amongst town vigilantes, and they decided to form a mob to run her out of town. They set fire to her cottage in the dark of night, and Moll ran until her legs gave out, kneeling by a large rock. She raised her hand to the sky, calling down a further curse to the townspeople, and eventually froze to that same rock, leaving her handprint as a notice of her final act. The boulder has since been preserved as a landmark, and even though the handprint is no longer clearly visible, visitors have reported feeling profoundly uncomfortable or experiencing terrible aches and pains around it, and cameras have been known to malfunction in its presence. On the coldest nights of the year, people have reported seeing a woman with long white hair and wearing a white dress walking through the fields and woods near the town.
Moving on to number 2, we have George Jacobs Sr. George Jacobs Sr. was an English colonist who was accused of witchcraft in 1692 during the Salem witch trials. George was quite the man around town. He had several run-ins with the law. He was known for having a violent temper, and in 1677 hit a man named John Tompkins Jr. Two witnesses said, and I quote, "One blow, and if the latter had not held him by the arms, he would have struck him some more, he being in such a passion." Now, he was fined for this. Then in 1674 he was sued by his neighbor after he chased some of his horses into the river where they drowned. He argued that the horses were trespassing on his property, whereas others thought he just liked wreaking havoc on town. Fast forward several years later, George Jacobs Sr. and his son, George Jacobs Jr., and his daughter-in-law and granddaughter were all accused of witchcraft. Everyone got off except for Jacobs Sr., and that's because he had a witch's mark. His body was searched and they found what was described as 3 teats on Jacobs. It was thought that if a person had an extra nipple, that this was a sign that they were a witch. Why? Well, it was believed that the extra nipple or teat was from when the devil or some demons sucked the witch's blood as a form of nourishment. It was said that Jacob Sr. had 3 of them, one in his mouth, one on his right shoulder blade, and one on his hip. Now, they weren't actually nipples though, it was just a 1/4 inch long fleshy thing protruding from his skin with a sharp point. They proceeded to stick pins in each of them to see what would happen. This was called the witch pricker. Apparently, if you are pricked and you don't have a reaction to getting pricked and you don't bleed, then you are a witch. Well, when they pricked each teat, Jacobs never reacted to it and he didn't even bleed. So he was found guilty on August 5th, 1692 and was sentenced to be hanged along with the other witches. And in our number 1 spot we have Elspeth Rioch. Elspeth Rioch was an alleged witch in Scotland during the early 1600s. When she was 12 years old, she claimed that she was approached by 2 men. One was dressed in all black, the other in green tartan. The man in green told her that if she followed his instructions, that she would be able to obtain magical powers. He told her to boil an egg and use the condensation from cooking the egg and take it and rub it on her eyes with unwashed hands. Sounds like an eye infection to me. He said that this would give her the powers to see and know everything that she wanted. So she followed his instructions and bam, it actually worked. So now I kind of want to go home and try it. I don't know, maybe it will work. And she actually developed clairvoyant skills. When Elspeth was older, she was visited again by the men. This time it was only the man in black. He showed up in her room one night. He told her that he was neither dead nor alive, but trapped between heaven and earth. He also told her that to maintain her magic skills, she needed to act dumb. That way, no one would suspect a thing. They'd be like, she's not a witch, no, she's way too dumb to be one. Well, eventually she was caught. In fact, she got in way more trouble because of her acting dumb. They were all like, she's fully a witch, she tried to trick us, let's kill her. At her trial in March of 1616, she confessed to using her clairvoyant powers to spy on people, and she would also use magical spells to cure illnesses. Furthermore, when they inspected her body, they found a witch's mark. She had what appeared to be a scar in the shape of bite marks on her shoulder. Later she confessed that she was bit by the devil and that was the mark that he left. She was charged with witchcraft and deceiving locals by pretending she was mute. In the end, she was executed by strangulation before having her body burned.
Number 5 on this list is what I'm going to be nicknaming the Scottish Witch from the Woods. I stumbled across a Scottish story about a witch where they were unable to discover her name. Hundreds of years ago, when Scotland was still being first developed, there was a village in the north of the country. This village was positioned directly next to a forest that they wanted to chop down and expand into. When they began their process of chopping down the forest, a witch, or the Witch of the Woods, came out and warned them that if they continued, she would curse their entire community. The women would become infertile, the crops would never grow, and people would go missing. Fearing for their safety, the group came to an agreement with this witch, where they were allowed to chop down a small section of the forest in exchange for leaving 1 sack every harvest of grain or produce by the edge of the forest. This agreement held true for quite a while until the community started to get less fearful and more greedy. They decided to go against this witch and chop down the rest of the forest without fear of consequence. When the witch came out of the forest again to address their betrayal, they refused to listen, and they hung her immediately. Right before she was executed though, she said that the new price was 3 bags of grain. This fell on deaf ears though, except for one fearful farmer that decided to heed the warning for a little while. The community went on thriving until once again that farmer's fear was replaced with greed. He stopped delivering the grain, and that very same day, his youngest daughter went missing. The community looked everywhere, but nobody could find her until somebody checked the mill. Through the bricks and all over the walls, blood started dripping down to the ground, and they knew exactly where his daughter went. That mill has since been torn down, but it was replaced with a silo. And to this day, the locals in that area still think that that silo is haunted by the Scottish Witch in the Woods. Number 4 on this list goes to the Paisley Witches. The Paisley Witches are actually nicknamed after the town of Paisley in Scotland, where these witches were based. Christian Shaw was an 11-year-old girl who was the daughter of a higher up in the Scottish community. It was this 11-year-old girl who fell victim to the curse of several witches. It started with a deep sickness that manufactured itself like any other: fevers, chills, exhaustion. But some reports say that it became much more than that. The story goes that Shaw on one occasion levitated from her bed, and on another occasion started chanting some deep curse. It was clear to everybody involved, including Shaw, that some form of Scottish witchcraft was afoot. Now, she made it evident that she believed multiple witches were involved in causing her ailment, 7 of them in fact. A A trial was held for these witches where it was discovered that they all had the witch's mark, or the devil's mark as some like to call it, on their bodies. After this evidence came to light, the jury's decision was easy and all of the witches were sentenced to death. Now this story was a long time ago, and it's hard to know for certain whether these individuals had anything to do with Shaw's ailment and witchcraft, or if they were wrongly accused, tried improperly, and the story has been exaggerated over time, which frankly is not unlike other potential witch stories during this period. The only thing that we can say for certain though is that the people back then and the 11-year-old Christian Shaw believed wholeheartedly that this group of Paisley witches was just that, witches. Number 3 on this list is Helen Duncan. Helen Duncan was a Scottish witch who traveled throughout Europe and actually isn't that far removed from present day. She died in 1956 and is known by some to be the last Scottish witch. As a young girl, she was considered by most to be a normal, albeit outspoken and loud, growing child. It wasn't until midway through her life that she started seriously practicing witchcraft. Helen garnered a name for herself by regularly performing seances every evening and having the ability to communicate with the dead. During her nightly rituals, she would invite viewers to come and watch. These viewers had reported seeing the materialization of ghostly figures directly in front of their eyes when Helen entered her deep witchly trance. Helen was also capable of and would often excrete a strange-looking ectoplasm from her mouth while she was doing this. And if this wasn't enough, Duncan could also see things that others couldn't. At one point, the ghost of a sailor appeared and talked about a very secretive incident that had happened in World War II that the public, or Helen Duncan, couldn't have possibly known about. After hearing this information, the authorities realized that they couldn't have Duncan revealing any important state secrets about the war and arrested her for witchcraft immediately. It was revealed during her trial that some of her witchy ways were not what people were led to believe though. Like her ectoplasm was simply the regurgitation of a cheesecloth made to look like some type of ghostly substance. Even though some of her abilities were proven to be fraudulent, it still doesn't explain how she was able to accurately predict or say the things that she couldn't have possibly known. Helen Duncan didn't use any of her abilities to harm anyone, but the capability to potentially talk to the dead, it's still very chilling.
In second place, Walpurga Hosmanen was a midwife, born sometime between 1510 to 1527, where she lived and worked in Bavaria. Her trial was one of the most ruthless witch trials in Germany. Walpurga's life had been unremarkable until her arrest on charges of witchcraft, sorcery, and vampirism in the year 1587. After her arrest, she was subjected to terrible torture. Go figure, until she confessed to her deeds. According to her confession, soon after she became widowed in 1556, when she was working in the field of the city, she had made arrangements to meet a male co-worker for sex in her cottage later that evening. But he had not arrived. Instead, a demon had come dressed in his clothes. She established a relationship with said demon, named Federlin, who made her swear allegiance to the devil and promised to rid her of poverty. Hey, sounds pretty tempting. During her confession, she stated that she had sworn herself to Satan and written it on a contract, and Federlin had then taken her to the real devil and confirmed her contract, after which they had drunk wine, consumed the roasted flesh of young humans, and had sex. And in case I need to clarify, she had intercourse with Federlin, not the devil. Plot twist, I know. She described visiting the devil often, and her demon lover had also visited her plenty to have sex with her, even in the streets at night and while she was in prison, leaving every time she said the name of Jesus. Alright, well, that's one way to come down from it. Federlin had gifted her the magical ointment she used to harm her victims, which included humans of a variety of ages, animals, and even crops. She confessed to having ended the life of many young during her work as a midwife by applying the special salve or putting pressure to their foreheads and to have sucked their blood like a vampire. Walpurga also confessed to having eaten the young with other witches and using their hair for sorcery. The full list of crimes she confessed to was very long, with her victims including 41 young humans, 2 mothers in labor, and a multitude of other people and animals, including cows, pigs, geese, and a horse. The decision of authorities was swift and unanimous, with the church and royal court finding her guilty and sentencing her to death. Before being burned, she was first taken through the city and stopped 5 times before reaching the place of execution. At the first stop, they branded her left breast and right arm with irons, then her right breast at the second stop, her left arm at the third, with her left hand being then branded at the 4th stop. Once they reached the place of execution, her right hand, with which she had made her oath as a midwife, was cut off before finally being burned alive at the stake. Her ashes were not allowed to remain on soil, but were then dumped in a stream. In first place, we have Gilles Garnier. I swear I don't intentionally plan to name male witches as the worst on my list, but they tend to commit the most heinous acts throughout history. And before anyone wants to try to correct me in the comments again, men have often been named as witches throughout time. Continuing on, Gilles Garnier was a reclusive loner living in the woods around Dole, France. Despite being a solitary man, he got married in 1572. Historians have reported that Gilles was ill-equipped to provide for his family because he wasn't a very good hunter, being used to only having to provide for himself until that point. That's when he started hunting something else. Hey, anyone out there want to guess? Come on, I bet you can. Alright, I'll give it to you. Human flesh. The first hunt happened around September 29th of 1572 when Garnier killed a young woman, allegedly well in the form of a wolf, and brought some of the flesh home for his wife to eat. How, thoughtful? Throughout the autumn, more young humans were found unalived and mutilated, including another young woman that Giles bit and clawed at, but was interrupted by passerbys before fleeing. The girl sadly succumbed to her injuries a few days later. In November, Gilles ended the life of a young man this time, enjoying the flesh from his thighs and belly before tearing off a leg to save for later. I could name more, but I'm feeling a little queasy as it is. This caused a stir amongst the townspeople, who believed it was a werewolf who was committing the horrors. Many folks had witnessed a humanoid-looking wolf near the scenes of the crimes, with the animal darting off once it was aware of being seen. Then in January of 1573, there was one last death. This time, villagers heard a child screaming and the sounds of a wolf, witnessing the wolf attempt to flee the scene, but changing into the form of Gilles as it did. He was then arrested, put on the rack, and confessed to killing the young and consuming their flesh. At his trial, more than 50 people testified, and he was found guilty of lycanthropy, the ability to turn into an animal, and witchcraft. He and his wife were burned at the stake on January 8, 1573.
Starting off this countdown, we have John Reed. John Reed was one of the 7 witches tried in 1697 Scotland. When he was caught, persecutors found that he had a mark on his loin. John said that the devil had nipped him there and that it indeed was a witch's mark. John also confessed that he was in service with the devil. The devil promised him wealth and abundance, but in return, John belonged to the devil. But John revealed that the devil broke his promise and never did anything he said he was going to do. On top of that, John admitted to attending a number of meetings with other witches. He also admitted that he was responsible for the torment of Christian Shaw. Christian was an 11-year-old who claimed she encountered a pack of witches who then bullied her and stole her milk. He also admitted that they all drowned her in the local well. As a result of his confession, it was very clear that he was a witch and he was locked away in a cell. The next day though, he was found dead. He had hung himself in his cell with his own scarf. It was believed that this was the devil's work. The devil convinced him to take his own life because John exposed him. Within the following weeks, the other witches close to John took their own lives in their cell as well. Again, it's thought that the devil possessed them and killed them off one by one because he was pissed with them. In our 4th spot, we have Janet Howitt. Between 1661 to 1663, 44 people in Beaufort, Scotland were accused of witchcraft. 7 of those accused were executed. The fate of some of the others remain unclear. One of the main women was Helen Guthrie. She was not a nice lady at all. This woman murdered her own stepsister and the stepsister's children. But she was like, wait, I'll help you, and claimed that she was able to identify other witches just by looking at them. So she said she would help them in the witch hunt if they went easy on her. She then went on to make up elaborate stories of witches meeting up at graves and eating the flesh of other humans, etc. The more she made up and pointed fingers, the longer she got to live, and same with her daughter Janet Howitt. Janet was also accused of being a witch like her mom. In fact, she had a witch's mark on her shoulder. She said it was from the devil biting it. She also said that it hurt for so long until the devil visited her again and stroked her shoulder. When he did that, the pain immediately stopped. Now, Janet was imprisoned with the rest of the accused, but we don't know what happened to her. They held a trial for her and no one testified against her. Plus, they only had the mark on her shoulder as evidence. We truly don't know if young Janet was let go or sadly killed. What we do know is that her plea date was 1666, 4 years after her arrest, so she was in jail for quite some time. In our 3rd spot, we have the Witches of Huntington. The Witches of Huntington were several individuals in the UK who were found guilty of witchcraft. First, we have Elizabeth Weed. Apparently one night, 3 spirits came to her and told her to renounce God and make a blood pact with the devil. So she listened, and that's what she did. John Winnick also did the same, but only agreed to if the spirits would help him out financially. Others, including John Clark Jr., were also visited by these spirits and decided to also renounce God and make a deal with the devil. Out of the 9 people accused, 5 were found guilty and hanged. Well, John Clark knew that they were going to search everyone's body for their witch's mark, which they all had. So what did he do? He cut off his 3 days before he was searched. Literally gouged it out of his skin so that the mark was gone. But I'm kind of confused because wouldn't that create another mark? I don't know, but I think he was let off the hook while he watched his friends be killed. He literally said, and I quote, "It was foolish to let the authorities find their marks. I cut off mine 3 days before I was searched." He then denied ever making a pact with the devil or being a witch, even though he was.
Number 2 on this list is Thomas Weir and his sister Griselle. What makes Thomas and his sister so scary is that nobody expected them to be involved in witchcraft at all. Up until the end of his life, Thomas was known by most to be a nice man of the community held in high esteem. However, nearing the end of his life, Thomas came clean about who he really was, telling the entire community during a religious service that he and his sister had been performing witchcraft for years, going into deep detail about how they had consistent communication with the devil and had devoted their entire lives to carrying out his bidding. This bidding manifested itself in many different ways, most of which involved causing harm to others, or in Thomas's case, getting it on with animals. Yeah. He was a weird dude. At first, the community barely believed him, but after the sister came out and corroborated his story in detail as well, they started piecing it together. Thomas was always walking around with a big black staff. The neighbors had reported hearing strange sounds in the evening coming from their home and weird lights going off. Suddenly, the guy that everybody thought they knew as their nice, friendly neighbor was somebody else entirely. Reports say that when he was burned at the stake, he took far longer to die than a human should. Also, his staff was burned with him, and it emitted an extremely strange sound and moved in unnatural directions when it was burning, as if it was being possessed by some force. I suppose that in the case of Thomas and Griselle, they had done such a good job at hiding their identities as witches and had been extremely methodical with their crimes, that before they died, they just had to let the world know just how evil they actually were. Number 1 on this list is Isabelle Gaudy. Isabelle was a Scottish witch from the 1600s, and frankly, she did everything. Through several confessions that she made on her own accord, without the pressure of torture or coercion from higher ups, Isabelle admitted to taking part in a wide array of witchcraft activities. She admitted that she had freely let the devil suck blood from her neck and that she had romantic relationships with the devil before. She admitted to taking the body out of child's graves and using it in a ritual to destroy people's crops. She said that she had made clay effigies or voodoo dolls of someone's children and used these to harm and even kill them. Isabelle was also part of a coven, a group of witches whose intentions were evil and had the ability to change their form into animals. She described in detail the brutal murders that she had committed for the devil and her fellow witches. She even offered up information about spells they had used to inflict illnesses on people, uttering some of them to the council she was confessing to. Now, it's unclear exactly why Isabelle decided to confess to these heinous crimes and oust herself as being a witch. She had to be aware that confessing to these crimes of this nature would surely mean her execution. It had been said, though, that she felt extreme guilt for her crimes, and that's why she decided to come forward and accept the consequences as they were. Regardless of what her intentions were, though, Isabelle Gaudy has to go down as one of the most dangerous known witches in Scottish history. Number 5 on this list is Goody Cole. Now, Goody Cole is a little interesting because today she is not a physical witch, but the ghost of her former witch-like self. Back in the 1600s in Hampton in the United States, Goody Cole lived with her older husband at the time. Once 1656 rolled around, though, she didn't live with him anymore. Goody Cole was arrested and found guilty of witchcraft. It was said that she had a mumbling habit, looked extremely witch-like, and also had some animal-related deaths tracked back to her in what would have been used for apparent rituals. It was also said that she was capable of turning herself into an animal and would often do so to disguise herself and trick others. When she was arrested, she was treated extremely poorly, often tortured, starved, and this whole process went on for years. After 6 years of this, she petitioned to be released so that she could support her husband, who was close to death at the time. The court agreed that they would let her do this, but she had to pay a sizable fee that she obviously didn't have access to because she was was in jail. Her husband eventually died alone without the support of his wife, something that was said to eat at Goody's conscience continually. Now, the manner of Goody Cole's death is sort of up in the air. Some say that she was stabbed with a stake for being a witch. Others say that she was finally released, but she was so old that she died in her home alone soon after, whereas some people say that she just died in prison. But one thing's for certain, Goody Cole was so unhappy with the people of Hampton actually that she never left. Many people in the area have reported in the older parts of town that they still see a dark, shadowy figure resembling an old woman. A phantom all in white that stalks people through the streets and can be seen in the windows looking down upon you as you walk through the city. People believe that this witch won't cause you any harm, but her goal is to make you feel as ostracized as possible, the exact way that she was made to feel back when she was still living. Number 4 on this list are the Boohags. Typically associated with the haunting of the coastal plains of South Carolina, it should be noted that there's no reason to believe that they could only be limited to this area, but there has been a large amount of activity of them here. Now, I should also note that the jury is still a little bit out on if these creatures are exclusively witches or exclusively vampires. I think that the truth of the matter is probably a horrifying mixture of both. Legend says that the Boohag needs to get sustenance from a person's breath, and that's how they sustain themselves. This action is somewhat similar to how the Dementors act in Harry Potter, but still with some notable differences. For starters, a Boohag is a fleshy creature that does not have any skin of its own. Therefore, it is simply a red tendon-esque humanoid being. Because they don't have any skin of their own, they will often steal the skin of their victims and fit it to their bodies until that skin inevitably deteriorates. The action of sucking someone's breath isn't as simple as my Harry Potter example either. Typically, once a Boohag finds a suitable victim, they will stalk that individual back to their home and wait until they're sleeping. Once they're passed out, the Boohag will break into their home and straddle the person who is asleep. This action is referred to by locals as a riding from a Boohag. Now, if the person wakes during this process and struggles, they will steal your skin and leave you for dead, but oftentimes you don't even realize that this is happening to you. They will suck your energy and it will put you into a deep catatonic-like state. After they've gotten their necessary energy, they'll leave you alone, and you'll wake the next morning feeling drowsy, most likely, not even realizing that you were ridden from a Boohag. Number 3 on this list is the White Witch of the Rose Hall Plantation in Jamaica. The Rose Hall Plantation is near Montego Bay. However, the witch in question is the ghost of a witch named Annie Palmer, and Annie Palmer wasn't from Jamaica at all. In fact, Annie Palmer spent most of her life in Haiti. She was born there and lived there with her parents for quite some time until they sadly passed away due to yellow fever. Afterwards, she was adopted by a witch who wasn't shy in passing her gifts on to young Annie. Regularly practicing witchcraft and voodoo, Annie soon became a strong witch in her own right. After she grew up, she moved to Jamaica and married John Palmer, taking his last name. Now, this is where things get a little bit crazy though. Annie murdered John Palmer. Then she got married again and murdered that husband. And then she got married again and murdered that husband. You'd think that these guys would have recognized that marrying Annie might not have been the best idea, but I guess love just conquers all. Annie didn't stop with her husbands though. She murdered countless slaves that worked on that plantation. This was right up until she was murdered herself by a slave named Taku. The people back then attempted to perform a voodoo ritual on this witch, not wanting to have her ever return again. However, it didn't work the way that they intended it to. The voodoo ritual actually trapped her at this location, and now she's said to be forever haunting the Rose Hall on Montego Bay. People have seen her ghost before, and they've heard screaming coming from nothing. The vision of a woman in white will appear sometimes, and it is said that if you stay at this plantation too long, then some deep misfortune will fall upon you or your family. So beware.
Number 2, Gallows Hill. Okay, so we were just talking about what happened to some of the accused during these hysterical trials and all the historical places that saw such violence. One of the most interesting witches tried of that was Giles Corey. Tried as a witch but never hanged. Actually, the old man known as Giles Corey was pressed to death with the judge's orders of him being a strong and stubborn old man and would not for the life of him indulge in the nonsense he was being accused for. He never admitted that he was a witch. Even throughout his torture, they laid him down and put a board on his back and proceeded to stone him to death, piling up stones on the board, resulting in crushing and eventually perishing underneath it. Only took about 4 days. Giles Corey apparently repeatedly yelled more weight, further cementing his plea of not guilty to everyone watching at Gallows Hill. With his last breath, Giles apparently cursed the town of Salem, and this area is now an unearthly hotspot for paranormal activity. The Gallows Hill that most people are aware of is nothing but a baseball diamond, but underneath that baseball diamond, bone fragments and coffins have been found. Interesting, because no witches were ever buried in coffins. Maybe vampires? Giles died from his inflicted torture on September 19th, 1692, just after the 8th anniversary of his wife Mary's passing. Strange sounds emerge from the area at night, including loud knockings, thumpings that wake up neighbors from their bed, and, of course, the full-bodied apparitions said to walk the grounds yelling in the middle of the night. There have been full-bodied apparitions spotted within the woods, with disembodied voices shrieking in the middle of the night. The disturbingly loud voices yelled throughout the area have had some locals scratching their heads. Is this the ghost of Giles himself, speaking his curse upon the town for all to hear? Shh! Trying to sleep! And coming in at number 1, House of Seven Gables. Locals say the Turner Ingersoll Mansion, or also known as famously the House of Seven Gables, is the most haunted spot in Salem. How many haunted spots are there? Ghosts are just like really competitive. Now a prominent museum, protected in its original form, used for plays and reenactments by the locals, the original structure was simple in nature, with only 2.5 rooms and just under 3 stories tall. By the time of John Turner's death, the prominent merchant, sea captain, and owner of the house, he was one of the most wealthy men in the entirety of Massachusetts. Turner and Ingersoll's House of the Seven Gables is a ghostly reminder of the tormented souls both trying and being tried at the time of the hangings. But the Turner Ingersoll is a reminder for more than just lost shipping fortunes and curses, as it's also a homely reminder of Judge Hawthorne himself and the guilt he inflicted on that town. As records show, Hawthorne may have feigned sympathy for the accused witches, but he never regretted his involvement in their trials or executions. And he certainly never expressed any remorse during the trials themselves for sending the accused to their death. Following the witch hysteria of the late 1600s, the Hawthorne family lost most of their wealth, no doubt influenced by the families of the accused witches who sought out justice for their dead loved ones. Acting now is only a museum of historic place. Each year, the museum hosts a series of theatrical plays, all of which surrounding the Salem witch trials. Such plays titled as Legacy of the Hanging, Judge Hawthorne, and Spirits of the Gables. But some of the actors aren't, well, very alive. As for the ghosts outside of the theatrical performances, well, everybody's got their own opinions on that, but tour guides and employees tend to avoid the attic, where some people have complained about being choked by ghostly figures. Local lore has many different stories to tell, and so do many of the visitors who enter Salem's most haunted house. Others report seeing a phantom boy who enjoys playing in the attic. Throughout the day, his giggles and laughs can be heard. Always giggling kids, eh? They're like the scariest ghosts. Well, that's about all the proof and lore I need to believe it. Imagine doing a show and a ghost just saying, line?
Today we have Guide Spademanger, one of the first women executed for sorcery in Denmark and in Scandinavia. In 1543, King Christian III of Denmark equipped a fleet of 40 ships to chase away an imperial Dutch fleet from the coast of Norway to the Netherlands. Outside of Helsinki, his fleet was stuck in a calm, and the whole project failed. Soon, a merchant's wife named Guide Spademanger was arrested and tortured, believed to have gathered a group of witches in a valley outside the city and enchanted the ships. She eventually admitted to conducting a spell with a coven on a hill above Elsinore, and named several more people that were involved, male and female, including vicars, which led to the expansion of the witch trial. Her trial was handled by the royal governor, Isabelle. She also said that the enchantments would never disappear unless Guide herself was allowed to remove them personally. The people that she named were arrested and tortured to an extent quoted as so hard their limbs were separated, but none other than Guide confessed. In November of 1543, the king demanded for the rightful old principal of witches to be burned, but she sadly suffered through further interrogations first before meeting the end of her time. In 4th place, we have Agnes Sampson. Starting off this tale, when King James decided to marry Anne, Princess of Denmark, as quickly as he possibly could, this wedding was arranged in Denmark with a proxy standing in for him since he was, located in Scotland. Anne's attempts to join her new husband across the ocean were severely delayed by dangerous and life-threatening storms, so he eventually decided to join her instead. After another wedding ceremony, which the king actually attended, the couple decided to head home to Scotland, with yet another storm plaguing their journey. Witchcraft trials had already begun in Denmark. Remember Guide? I mentioned a minute ago? And the king had taken note. So when it was reported to him that witches East Lothian conspired to cause the treacherous weather that threatened not just his life, but that of his way too young bride, he believed what he was told. Agnes Sampson was an elderly woman who was known locally as a healer and a midwife, having cared for and successfully cured cured many neighbors of ailments throughout her life. She was a widow with several children, living close to poverty in East Lothian. She had been suspected and investigated for witchcraft before, so there was no surprise locally that her name was given. After she was named, Agnes was quickly captured and protested her innocence. The News from Scotland, which was an English-written pamphlet that would have been written in London around 1591, says that Agnes was shaved from head to toe and each part of her body tortured for hours, intentionally to cause intense pain. The devil's mark was found, and she confessed, saying that she and hundreds of other witches attended North Berwick Kirk on Halloween night to meet with the devil to end the life of the king. She claimed the devil appeared to her as a black man, a dog, or a hayrick. Agnes also mentioned various attempts to obtain the king's shirt or other personal linens in order to work her charms. She had attended a witches' convent at North Berwick with her son-in-law, where they collected bones and powdered them for Sid charms. To prove her magical powers, she told the king the exact words that had passed between him and his new wife on their wedding night. Agnes's trial was presided over by a judge, with a jury of 17 men from East Lothian, many of whom would have known Agnes personally. After hearing the evidence, they found her guilty of 49 out of the 51 charges. In January of 1591, she was taken to Edinburgh Castle and met her end by way of a rope necklace, with her body then being burned at the stake. The naked ghost of a bald Agnes is said to roam the palace of Holyrood House, the official Scottish residence of the British monarchy. Let me know in the comments if you've ever been or if you've seen Agnes yourself. In the middle of this scary sandwich, we have Angele de la Barthe in third place. Born around 1230 in Toulouse, France, she was a noblewoman and a Gnostic Christian, which was a sect that was considered heretical by the Catholic Church. By definition, Gnostic Christian is a term that refers to various branches of early Christianity that claim to have special divine knowledge. They have different views of the Bible, Jesus Christ, salvation, and God compared to traditional Catholics. They have diverse teachings and practices such as Valentinianism, Sethianism, Manichaeism, and Mandaeism. Some of them regard Jesus as a human being who became enlightened or Christed, while others see him as a divine being who came to lead humanity back to the light. In 1275, Angele was accused of having sexual relations with Satan, and she was impregnated by him, giving birth to a baby that had the head of a wolf and a serpent's tail. This being consumed human flesh, and Angele stole infants to feed it. When she was arrested, she was tortured and eventually confessed that the accusations were true. She was sentenced to death and burned alive, making her the first in Europe to have her life ended from accusations of witchcraft. Also, fun fact for you, at the time it wasn't illegal to have sexual relations with demons. If you have access to a time machine out there, don't get any ideas.
Number 2 on this list is Jenny Greenteeth. Jenny Greenteeth is a witch in British folklore that is said to haunt the waters of Lancashire, Cheshire, and Shropshire. I know, it's a lot of shires. Jenny is a river witch and lives in the rivers of these areas looking for victims to drag down with her. As you'd imagine, with a name like Greenteeth, her appearance is pretty grotesque. Green algae-like hair, a wrinkled witchy face, skin that is the same color as a bog, and a weird fleshy exterior. Jenny is certainly not a looker, but I suppose it doesn't matter a whole lot as she uses the swamp like water and pond scum to mask her appearance so you can't see her beneath the filth. The origin of Jenny Greenteeth is still up for debate, but the bare bones of the tale are pretty consistent. Jenny was a girl in a local British town who was the victim to some heavy bullying. One day when she was at her job getting water from the well, somebody yelled at her that they hope she falls in and dies. Well, that's exactly what happened. Her spirit manifested as Jenny Greenteeth, this old hag who now haunts the waters in this area. Jenny is not simply a harmless witch either. She preys on people, specifically children that get too close to the water. Sometimes she will try to lure them towards the riverbank by calling out to them or singing a tune where no one can figure out where it's coming from. Now, this tactic is one that we've talked about on this channel before with the Utah water babies and is very successful. She lunges her hand out and grabs them, dragging them into the water, or they will drown and never be seen again. This water witch is known by all the locals in the area, with everyone having some slightly different adaptations to the legend. General consensus though, if you hear someone singing from the rivers of Britain, don't go near it. Number 1 on this list is La Lechuza. La Lechuza is a witch based in Mexican folklore that is said to haunt the Mexican nights. I wish I could pinpoint the location down for you guys to be a specific region in Mexico, but this witch is sadly far too mobile for that. La Lechuza used to live in a small Mexican town and regularly practice witchcraft. Her intentions were foul though, and would regularly cause harm to others, whether that be to them directly or to their livelihood. The townsfolk, once they discovered that she was the cause of their misfortune, fortune, raided her home, and viciously murdered her. They didn't kill her well enough though, because her spirit still clings to life to this day. Said to regularly take the form of an owl and fly throughout Mexico, La Lechuza is constantly on the hunt for food. Her preferred meal is young men. This bird is apparently massive, and once it sets its sights on you, it will be nearly impossible to escape. Some people have reported that she is so big that they've seen her run cars off of the road and eat her victims in the wreck. She also employs some other tactics instead of just brute force. Sometimes she will mask her voice as a baby and sit outside your door until you open it, and then she'll pounce. You may also hear the consistent racket of an owl howling in the night. Go and check your window to see what the commotion is and become this owl lady's dinner. Basically, she is a giant owl that you can't run from, you can't beat in a fight, and is also able to outwit you with some strange tactics. She haunts all of Mexico, and you just need to hope that if you were there, she doesn't pick you to be her next meal.
Number 5. Julie Brown. Our first witch today on the list of which witch is Julie Brown, legendary voodoo priestess of the swamps. New Orleans is filled to bursting with two things: the most wondrous advancements in soul food and gumbo technology on the planet, and ghost stories. There's a whole lot of voodoo to go around in Louisiana, and in Manchac they say there's the ghost of an old voodoo priestess named Julie Brown. The story of Julie Brown is an unnerving one. I would certainly hope so, otherwise it wouldn't be on this list. She was said to be reclusive, would sit on the porch of her swamp shack and spend the day cackling, predicting the demise of nearby towns and its residents, singing twisted songs about her death and the apocalypse and the end of days. Despite the fact that she was a kooky old lady singing songs about the apocalypse on her front steps, locals actually feared her and treated her as an oracle and a prophet, and were very nervous of wronging her just in case she placed a hex on them, which, you know, is reasonable. You should always treat everyone you meet with kindness just in case they turn out to be a witch who can hex you. The prediction she's most known for, besides one bizarre correct prediction about the 1994 Super Bowl Cowboys at Bills game, was her threatening prediction in 1915, where Julie Brown would cackle over and over and over that she was going to die and take everyone with her. She chanted this again and again until her death. On her funeral, a hurricane hit the town, decimating 3 villages and taking countless lives. Julie is said to be buried in the swamp, and locals believe it was her spirit that caused the hurricane. And if you happen to be passing through Manchac, just pay your respects to Miss Julie Brown. Like I said, you never know what kind of secrets somebody has. And if you're looking for more stories about witches, or really any kind of urban legend, Top 5 Scary has all of that and then some. I'm not kidding. If you can think it up, there's pretty good odds we've done 2 to 3 videos on it. We got something scary for everything under the sun and above it. So hit subscribe. Please make sure you hit that little bell so you don't miss a single scream, but do that after this video because I got 4 more witch stories coming up for you right now. And wouldn't you know it, the next one's about a bell. Number 4, the Bell Witch. In the 1800s, a farmer going by the name of John Bell moved his family to picturesque Adams, Tennessee, onto a beautiful 300-acre farm, little slice of American pie. Bell quickly became a figurehead of the community, respected by many, and became a local leader at the town church. For the Bell family, things were the brightest they've ever been. They were living the dream and ringing in good fortune. I was trying to make a Bell pun work there. There's probably a better one. Things wouldn't be good for long, and they'd find themselves in a nightmare shortly. By 1817, strange, inexplicable things started to occur all around the farmstead. John Bell found a strange animal on the farmstead, a mutant hybrid that resembled a grotesque mix between a dog and a rabbit. I know that sounds like it would be cute, but I think if you get the wrong parts of both, that's just going to turn out to be a very, very ugly animal. I think dog, rabbit ears, pretty cute. Maybe like dog, rabbit face, dog, rabbit body. I don't know. Mess. Anyway, it was a disgusting thing. The younger members of the Bell family would wake up covered in red scratches all over their bodies at all hours of the day. The family would hear faint whispering and singing that sounded like an old woman singing hymns. Most tragic is the Bells found a mysterious vial of liquid inside their home that no one could explain or understand. Nervous about what it was, the Bells offered the mystery liquid to their cat, which passed almost immediately. Rest in peace, Bell cat, taken too soon, Undeservedly, you didn't deserve to be an experiment for them. For 3 long years, the Bell family was tormented by a mysterious entity that would later become known as the Bell Witch, after the mysterious old woman's humming and singing. In 1820, John Bell quickly grew extremely ill, quickly descending in his health, and would pass away later. At his funeral, the mourners complained they could all hear the laughing of an old woman, mocking and singing the fate of the late John Bell. The farm became a haunted attraction, where it still is to this day, and it even caught the attention of President Andrew Jackson, who in 1819, a year before Mr. Bell's passing, visited to see if legends of the witch were real. Allegedly. As soon as his carriage arrived at the property, the horses refused to budge anymore. The animals can always tell. Number 3, the Black Hag. Our next witch probably has the most impressive title out of any of them, the Black Hag. That is such a cool name for a witch to have. She resides in a church called, oh god. Let me try this. The Monastery. Oh. What, you want to throw that on screen for me? Monastery. How am I supposed to say that? This is the witch's curse. I don't even know about any witchy stuff she does. She tries to get you to say this evil word and then it curses your family. I'm getting a note over here. It says that it's also called the Abbey of the Black Hag. Well, that's what we're going with. We're not calling it that other thing. I'm not doing that. The Black Abbey of the Hag, which as far as I know is the only name this church has ever gone by, was built in 1298. Wow, it's an old church. And was one of the few well-known medieval convents in old Ireland. The remains of the abbey still stand today in a secluded valley, making an already mysterious and supernatural place just that much more atmospheric. The place is called the Abbey of the Black Hag, for God's sakes. You don't name a place that unless it's pretty haunted. Sounds like it's straight out of Dishonored. And while I've got you here, Dishonored 3, when's that happening? Now, it's believed that the last abbess, which is a horrible word, in charge of the abbey practiced witchcraft, and in the scary way. She brought death, misfortune to the surrounding areas. Pope Martin V condemned the abbey. He was not down for witches at all. Catholic Church don't play with witches. The accused witch left to live out in the damp, deserted abbey by herself, which she probably loved because that sounds scary. Over time, her skin blackened, her hair furrowed, and her soul twisted, leading to the place being named the Abbey of the Black Hag. And if you can believe this, there's actually more to this story. The Count and Countess of Desmond once called the abbey home when attempting to flee their attackers, where the Countess was fatally struck by an arrow and buried by her husband, but it would not be the end of the Countess. Sightings of a ghostly figure around the ruins of the abbey were common, eventually leading to someone digging up worn out finger bones. And it's said now that a woman's panicked shrieking can be heard in the early hours around the abbey.
Number 2 on this list is called pricking. This was a horrible test that was basically just a glorified means of torture. Now, I'm sure that most of you know what a witch mark is, but if you don't, then it's basically a mark from the devil that indicates you have a pact with Satan, and witches have these on their bodies. However, if there's an accused witch that doesn't have a witch mark, that doesn't mean that they're off the hook. It's possible that they still have a witch mark. It's just hard to see, or it can't be seen to the naked eye. Well, if this was the case, then you need a professional pricker, right? A professional pricker is someone who works solely on discovering witches' marks. That's right, guys, this was so common that they actually had a career path that came out of it. It was believed that a witch's mark didn't feel any pain, and in turn, wouldn't show any signs of weaknesses. Therefore, if you pricked them with a sharp point, then the person wouldn't be in any pain and no blood would come from this prick. So professional prickers would have their accused witches, and they would just take their chosen sharp object and just stab them until you had a spot that didn't bleed. And then, because you didn't bleed, they would kill you for being a witch anyways. It also didn't stop at just pricking, but it even went to scratching as well. The victim of an apparent witch would be allowed to come and scratch that witch until they drew blood. This was supposed to cause the victim some relief from their symptoms, and if it did, then that would be enough to make the accused person guilty of witchcraft and they would be executed. Yeah, you really did not want to get stuck with the pricking test. Number 1 on this list is the swimming test. Now this is one that I'm sure most of you have already heard about, but it has to be on this list based on just simply how ridiculous it was. Now even though in hindsight this test was nuts, I do kind of understand the logic of how they got there in the first place. It was believed back then that witches had rebuffed the sacrament of Christ, meaning that baptism was definitely a no-go for a witch. Because water is tied heavily to baptism, the logic followed that if you were a witch and you were thrown into the water, then the water would reject your body from entering, and therefore you would float to the top of it. To test this theory, they would take their suspected witches, strip them down naked, hog tie their limbs, and then throw you into the water, and if you floated, then you're a witch, but if you sank, you're just a person. Again guys, this kind of makes sense, except for the people who weren't actually witches and sank to the bottom. Now I should note that they would sometimes tie a rope around your body, and if you sank, they would pull you back up to the top. But this only happened sometimes. Other times they would just throw you in, and if you sank and drowned, then oh well, I mean, you drowned now and at least you weren't a witch. Also, this tying of the rope wasn't a perfect science either. A lot of times people who sank would drown anyways as they were being pulled up. Basically, just the accusation of being a witch meant that you would be sentenced to death, because if you did somehow manage to float, then now you're a witch and you're gonna be burned or hung, and if you did sink, as most people did, then you'd probably just drown. Sometimes, even if you did sink and you did then get pulled back up to the top and survived, they would just kill you anyways. Back then, if more than one person accused you of being a witch, then you were pretty much as good as dead.
In 5th place, we have witch cakes to kick us off. Sadly, these aren't yummy Halloween cakes, a thought which makes me very hungry, but instead a bizarre form of counter magic, a supernatural dessert used to identify suspected evildoers. In cases of mysterious illness or possession, witch hunters would take a sample of the victim's urine, mix it with rye meal and ashes, and bake it into a cake. This stomach-turning concoction was then fed to a familiar or animal helper of the suspected witch in the hopes that the creature would fall under its spell and reveal the name of the guilty sorcerer. During the hysteria that preceded the Salem witch trials, Tituba famously helped prepare a witch cake to identify the person responsible for bewitching young Betty Paris and others. The brew failed to work, and Tituba's knowledge of spells and folk remedies was later used as evidence against her when she was accused of being a witch. Before I forget, another use for a witch cake came from burning the pastry in hopes that the scorching heat would transfer to the witch and force her to reveal herself. Whew. Anybody else starting to get warm? Oh great, just me. In 4th place, we have a scold's bridle, also known as a witch's bridle, a gossip's bridle, a Brank's bridle, or simply Branks. This was an instrument of punishment as a form of public humiliation. This thing was an iron muzzle in an iron framework that enclosed the head. Some exceptions were masks that depicted suffering, but not pleasant either way. My brain just jumped to a similar modern device used for pleasure instead of pain, and no, I will not elaborate on that thought, but let's clarify. A bridle bit, or cur plate, around 5 centimeters by 2.5 centimeters in size, was slid into the mouth and pressed down on top of the tongue, often with a spike on the tongue as a compress. It functioned to silence the wearer from speaking entirely, and caused extreme pain and physiological trauma to scare and intimidate the wearer into submission. This prevented speaking and resulted in many unpleasant side effects for the wearer, including excessive salivation and fatigue in the mouth. Seeing as I've always been a chatty Cathy, I can totally see how I would have been sentenced to this, and my jaw hurts just thinking about it. The wearer was then led around the town by a leash, and for extra humiliation, a bell could also be attached to draw in crowds. First recorded in Scotland in 1567, the Branks were also used in England and its colonies. The Kirk sessions in barony courts in Scotland inflicted the contraption mostly on female transgressors, and women considered to be rude, nags, common scolds, drunken, but mostly witches. It was also used as corporal punishment for other offenses, notably on female workhouse inmates. The person to be punished was placed in a public place for additional humiliation and sometimes beaten. Just sometimes, not every time apparently. Knowing what I know about history and cover-ups, I'm going to lean towards probably most of the time. The Lanarkburg records record a typical example of the punishment being used. When wearing the device, it was, impossible for the person to either eat or speak. Other pranks included an adjustable gag with a sharp edge, causing any movement of the mouth to result in laceration of the tongue. In Scotland, pranks could also be permanently displayed in public by attaching them, for example, to the town cross, tron, or toll booth. Then the ritual humiliation would take place, with the miscreant on public display. Displaying the pranks in public was intended to remind the populace of the consequences of any rash action or slander. Whether the person was paraded or simply taken taken to the point of punishment, the process of humiliation and expected repentance was the same. Time spent in the brittle was normally allocated by the Kirk session in Scotland or by a local magistrate.
Number 5 on this list is the prayer test. This test basically acts as the single most important audition of your life. It was thought that witches were unable to recite the word of God, and that reading or speaking the Bible would cause their immediate demise. Therefore, they would have accused witches come to the front of the court or gathering and recite verses from the Bible. Now, this test makes a decent amount of sense if you think about it, although we can't forget what era we were in when this took place. Not everyone was literate at this time. In fact, a lot of them weren't. I can also imagine the immense pressure that you would feel to perform that verse to perfection. Speaking as somebody who's been through their fair share of auditions in life, I can tell you that auditions are nerve-wracking to begin with, but add on the fact that your life is on the line, that really raises the stakes, I think. And it wasn't enough to have you simply not go up in flames as you were reading it. A simple slip-up, a mispronunciation, a little pause, all of these things were evidence that the accused was a witch and was struggling to get through the verse. The crazy thing about this as well is that even if you did recite this verse flawlessly without fail, you might still be put to death anyways. George Burroughs had to perform this test during the Salem trials, and even after he absolutely nailed it, they still killed him. The people were so convinced that he was a witch who needed to die that they chalked up his performance as being a devilish trick and killed him regardless. Number 4 on this list is witch cakes. Witch cakes are pretty unique in how they were administered because your fate wasn't decided by a person or the cake itself. It was actually by a dog. Now, I feel for these pups because they had to eat these concoctions and they aren't palatable at all. What people would do is take a sample of the victim's urine, so the person presumably being affected by the witch, take a sample of their urine, and then they take some rye meal and a sprinkle of ashes, and that's it. Take those 3 things, mix them together, toss them in the oven, and then bake it up. Now, I don't really know where they got the idea that urine and ashes would tell us anything about these witches, but that's the conclusion that they got. They then take the dog, and it was thought that dogs were not only man's best friend, but actually witches' best friends as well. That dogs back in the day had some sort of tie to witches, and that they were supporters of witches. So you take this witch cake, you feed it to the dog, and now you just observe that dog's behavior, and the accused witch has to just cross their fingers that this dog doesn't start acting weirdly, biting, barking at nothing, just generally acting strangely. It was thought that if the dog did this or exhibited any of the same symptoms that the victim was experiencing, then witchcraft was assuredly at foot, and then we can start pointing fingers. I gotta say though that I seriously feel for the dog in this instance, because I mean the poor guy did literally nothing at all, and now he's gotta eat this urine cake that may or may not curse him with something. So yeah, the dog's got it rough here, guys. Number 3 on this list is called the touch test. Witches were said to have the ability to control other people. Basically, they could cast a spell on you and you're now either under their control or in a lot of pain. If these witches were to touch the person who's believed to be under their curse or spell though, then that individual would have some type of response. Let's say someone who's controlled by these witches starts acting strange or frantic. Then a simple touch by the witch would calm them completely. I'm not really sure if this theory on witches and touching their victims has been founded by anything or is true to this day, but back then they definitely believed that this was the case. The problem with this test though was that there was a lot of wannabe actors back then. In 1662, there were 2 older women who were being accused of witchcraft. Their names were Amy Denny and Rose Cullender. Now, they had reportedly cursed some young girls and were causing them serious harm, which manifested itself in the way of seizures. These girls would have seizures, but it was believed that if the witch who was possessing them, so Amy and Rose, were to touch them, then the seizure would stop immediately. Well, sure enough, this was tested in court, and it actually worked. The second that the old women touched these girls, the seizures stopped immediately and their hands just grew completely soft and totally calm. But let's not kill them just yet. They then blindfolded the young girls and did the exact same experiment, but now with other people subbing in and touching them. Well, it turns out the girls were faking and would stop seizuring to other people who touched them instead of just the older women. Perfect. So Amy Amy and Rose, they can't possibly be witches then. We ran the test, they passed, they should be set free. Maybe in today's world that's what would happen, but not in 1662. Both of them were hung anyways, and the young girls got off scot-free.
In third place, we have a ducking chair, not to be confused with a cucking chair, which is a whole other concept, or the red hot stools women accused of having sexual acts with the devil would have to sit on. I sadly don't have enough information to unpack that stool, other than ouch! But let's get on with the ducking, shall we? The ducking stool was a strongly made wooden armchair, often made out of oak, in which the offender was seated, with an iron band being placed around them so that they would not fall out during their immersion. How thorough. The earliest record of the use of such is towards the beginning of the 17th century, with the term first being attested in English in 1597. It was used both in Europe and in the English colonies of North America. Usually the chair was fastened to a long wooden beam fixed as like a seesaw on the edge of a pond or river. And as much as I love and miss wooden playgrounds, I feel like this might not have been as fun. Sometimes the ducking stool was not a fixture, but was mounted on a pair of wooden wheels so that it could be wheeled through the streets, and at the river edge was hung by a chain from the end of a beam. In sentencing a woman, the magistrates ordered the number of duckings she should have, and as much as I've scoured the internet, I can't seem to find number data on this. If you have any ideas, please let me know in the comments. Another type of ducking stool was called a tumbrel, and was a chair on two wheels with two long shafts fixed to the axles. This was pushed into the pond, and then the shafts would be released, ergo tipping the chair up backwards. Sometimes the punishment proved fatal and the subject died. Once again, the sometimes should be taken with a pound of salt. In medieval times until the early 18th century, ducking was a way used to establish whether a suspect was a witch. The ducking stools were first used for this purpose, but ducking was later inflicted without the chair. In this instance, the subject's right thumb was bound to her left big toe, her left thumb to her right big toe, a rope was tied around the waist of the accused, and she was thrown into a river or a deep pond. If she floated, it was deemed that she was in league with the devil, rejecting the baptismal water. If she sank, she was cleared. Oh, and she'd be dead. Can't forget that part. Silly me. In second place, we have witch mark hunting and pricking. Witch hunters often had their suspects stripped and publicly examined for signs of an unsightly blemish that witches were said to receive upon making their pact with Satan. This devil's mark could supposedly change shape and color and was believed to be numb and insensitive to pain. Prosecutors might also search for the witch's teat, which was an extra nipple allegedly used to suckle the witch's helper animals. In both cases, it was really easy for even the most minor physical imperfections to be labeled as the work of the devil himself. Oh my, the horror. Moles, scars, birthmarks, sores, and tattoos could all qualify, so examiners rarely came up empty-handed. I'm trying to think of just how many birthmarks I have all over my body, so just add that to the tally of how I'm, a witch. Seriously, I feel the burning from the flames already. In the midst of witch hunts, desperate villagers would sometimes even burn or cut off any offending marks on their bodies, only to have their wounds labeled as proof of a covenant with the devil. So, damned if you do, damned if you don't. If I'm adding like scars to my blemish count, yeah, forget it. Okay, I think the temperature in here just went up another couple of degrees. Seriously. If witch hunters struggled to find obvious evidence of witches' marks on a suspect's body, they might resort to the ghastly practice of pricking as a means of, sussing it out. Come on! Even having a flawless body isn't going to exonerate you? What the heck? Witch hunting books and instructional pamphlets noted that the marks were insensitive to pain and couldn't bleed, so examiners used specially designed needles to repeatedly stab and prick at the accused person's flesh until they discovered a spot that produced the desired results. In England and Scotland, the punishment was eventually performed by well-paid professional prickers, many of whom were actually con men who used adult needle points to identify fake witches' marks. Well then, if you ever feel like your job just, isn't real, remember that people in history were paid to do well. Along with pricking, the unfortunate suspect might also be subjected to scratching by their supposed victims. This test was based on the notion that possessed people found relief by scratching the person responsible with their fingernails until they drew fluid. If their symptoms improved after clawing at the accused's skin, it was seen as partial evidence of guilt. No, absolutely not. I can't see anyone being proven innocent whatsoever from this nonsense. Talk about a biased court. In first place, we have dismemberment and mutilation. This is where my own stomach gets all topsy-turvy, so fair warning, I can handle creepy stuff, no problem. But gore? There's a reason I haven't been able to bring myself to watch the Terrifier movies. So when witch hunters wanted to get answers back in the day, if I haven't made it clear enough by now, they didn't really care about being humane or, coercion, just being right. They would do whatever they deemed necessary to get a confession, leading many witches to confess just to make the pain stop and end their lives, well, humanely, say goodbye to your fingernails, because that was practically just a footnote in what they were allowed to do. While Parga Hosmanen of Bavaria was led through multiple different stages of mutilation while being paraded to her execution. At the first stop, her left breast and right arm were branded with irons, then her right breast at the second stop, her left arm at the third, with her left hand being then branded at the fourth stop. Once they reached the place of execution, her right hand, with which she had made her oath as a midwife, was cut off before she was finally burned alive at the stake. Oh, her ashes were not allowed to remain on soil, but they were just, dumped in a stream. Probably the most extreme extent of this was a punishment normally reserved for killers, but exceptions were made for witches who confessed without torture to crimes deemed brutal enough for it. Are y'all ready for this? The offender would be strapped to 4 horses, with one arm or leg attached to each separate horse, and then on command the horses would start running and rip the offender's arms and legs off. The person would die somehow, and painfully, through life source and limb loss.
Coming in at number 5, the Corwin Witch House. The Jonathan Corwin House in Salem, or simply known better as the Witch House, was the home of Judge Jonathan Corwin, 1640 to 1718, a prominent figure in the horrors that happened there, and is actually the only structure you can visit in Salem today that has direct ties to the Salem witch trials of 1692. Well, that might not be the case, because we got a couple of those coming up. Trust me, this place is riddled with ties to those witches. Corwin bought the house in 1675 and lived there for more than 40 years. The Witch House is a 350-year-old thick building with black painted timber, 2.5 stories tall, built to last, massive and looming. Located at 310 Essex Street in the historic district of Salem, the house stands in testimony to the witch trials, and it's believed that the Witch House was used by Jonathan Corwin and others to actually interrogate those accused of witchcraft. The Witch House remained with the Corwins, of course, until the mid-1800s, yet there wasn't many family around to liven it up. The Corwin curse seems like a weird one, since all the Corwin's kids, 5 children, all perished young from separate complications within the house. And this is where it gets really weird. Not only is the place haunted to hell and back, with specters seen in the attic upstairs and loud voices, arguments heard in the empty house at night, 8 Corwin lives were lost to premature death in that house. All Corwins. Yeah, I'd say that makes for a pretty cursed home, alright? A family curse. Number 4, Proctor's Ledge. There are over 1,000 documents from Salem witch trials, yet none of the accounts actually specify where the hangings took place. For many years it was believed that the 19 people who were executed in Salem were hanged at the summit of Gallows Hill, on the edge of town to the west, where the town would meet for large gatherings. Seems like after some homework, the hill alone would be too hard to climb, not an ideal spot to hear or see the live trials, and was too thick and heavily wooded. Maps of 1700 Salem show Gallows Hill marked on the map, but no actual marker for the execution site. I feel like a detective all of a sudden. A team of researchers began to reconsider all of the evidence around 2010, eras of homework collected over the years, and eventually concluded that the real execution spot was Proctor's Ledge. Boom, baby! This was confirmed in 2016. Part of the evidence included 1692 eyewitnesses' accounts who wrote in journals that they were able to see the hangings from their homes to actually remains being dug up and found now. Now I know what you're thinking, it's named after John Proctor. No, it's not. However, odd timing, as he was one of the witches accused of witchcraft along with 3 of his other mistresses. Locals say that the lady in white visits Proctor's Ledge. Some visitors claim to have caught the sight of her, though others catch only her disembodied voice. Are these the phantoms of the unsettled spirits tied to the grounds where they were hanged for eternity? Who knows? Number 3, Charter Street Burial Grounds. The Charter Street Burial Grounds started in 1637, also known as Old Burying Point or the Charter Street Cemetery, is the oldest cemetery in Salem. Many early and famous Salem residents are buried here, such as John Hawthorne, a judge in the Salem witch trials of 1692. Hawthorne, whose father had been a Salem magistrate, was born in 1641 and had 6 children. Hawthorne experienced several deaths in his family, including those of all his 3 brothers. Hawthorne died in 1717 at the age of 76, never apologizing for the role in the Salem witch trials. His headstone is surrounded by granite rectangles to help preserve what is left of the original stone. Being one of the oldest cemeteries and the sickening things that happen there, ghosts and spirits are often seen around the gravesite. There have been many strange occurrences here. Witch stuff aside, about 400 years of ghostly encounters have happened at the old Burying Point Cemetery. Over the years, people have successfully captured EVP of voices from beyond the grave at the site. If you can hear me, say something. Stop yelling. Oh, sorry. Photographs of mysterious shadows, orbs, white mist, and even full apparitions are seen here. One of these apparitions is believed to be Mary Bright Corey, who died 1684. She was the second wife of Giles Corey, who later became an unfortunate victim of the witch trials himself. Another ghost seen is the powdered blue dress lady, whilst holding a picnic basket in one hand and sometimes accompanied by a young boy. Normally, once the cameras come out, the lady in white transitions into numerous bright orbs or vanishes altogether. Maybe the ghost woman is the same Mary Corey forever watching over Judge Hawthorne's grave.
Third place, Ray Sherwood, the last convicted witch of Virginia. Also known as the Witch of Pungo, she was born in 1660 to carpenter John White and his wife Susan, and married her husband, Farmer James Sherwood, in 1680, whom she birthed 3 sons with. Grace was a renowned healer, growing her own herbs on their land, also acting as a midwife. While no official paintings or drawings of her exist, she is described as very attractive and tall, with a sense of humor. She was known to wear trousers instead of dresses while doing yard work, something almost unheard of at the time. The first accusation of wrongdoing against her came in 1697, when Richard Capps accused her of using a spell to end the life of his bull, of which the court could not make a decision. Grace and her husband filed a countersuit, which was settled out of court. In 1698, Grace was then accused by neighbor John Gisborne of enchanting his pigs and cotton crop. No court action was taken this time, and another countersuit by the Sherwoods went nowhere. In that same year, Elizabeth Barnes alleged that Grace had taken the form of a black cat, entered the Barnes' home, jumped over her bed, whipped her, and left through the keyhole. The allegations went nowhere. Same for the countersuit, leaving the Sherwood couple to pay court fees for the 3rd time. After her husband's death in 1701, Grace managed to dodge further allegations until 1705, when she got into a fight with neighbor Elizabeth Hill. She sued Elizabeth and her husband for battery and was awarded damages of 20 shillings, so roughly the equivalent to 170 Canadian dollars today. In March, the Princess Anne County Justices assembled 2 juries, both made up of women, with the first being ordered to search Elizabeth's home for wax or baked items that might indicate she was a witch. Led by Elizabeth Hill herself, Grace was examined by the second jury of 12 ancient and knowing women, appointed to look for markings on her body that might be brands of the devil. And they discovered 2 marks not like theirs or like those of any other woman known to them. On July 5th, the justices ordered a trial by ducking to take place. If Grace were to sink, she would be deemed innocent. If she were to float and survive, she would be declared as guilty and imprisoned. Around 10 a.m. on July 10th, she was taken down a dirt lane now known as Witch Duck Road to a plantation near the mouth of the Lynnhaven River. The event attracted people from all over the colony, who began to shout, "Duck the witch!" It is believed that her right thumb was bound to her left big toe and her left thumb to her right big toe, and then she was flung into the water, where she quickly floated to the surface. The sheriff then tied a 13-pound Bible around her neck, causing her to sink, but she untied herself and returned to the surface, cementing her status as a witch. She was then imprisoned for 8 years and lived quietly until her death in 1740. According to legend, her sons placed her body near the fireplace, and a wind came down the chimney, with her corpse disappearing amongst the embers. The only clue left behind was a cloven hoofprint. Stories about the devil taking her body, unnatural storms, and loitering black cats quickly arose after her death, and local men ended the life of every feline they could find. This widespread elimination of cats is believed to have caused the infestation of rats and mice in 1743. In our second place position, we're traveling over to 1662 Scotland, where Isabelle Gaudy, housewife to John Gilbert, residents of the Aldern region, and that's about all we know of her personal life. It is believed that she was tortured before her confession. Methods used at the time included the use of thumb screws, foot roasting, witch pricking to test for a devil's mark, sleep deprivation, or isolation with food and water restrictions. Ugh. The specific details of the original accusation or reason for her confession are unknown, but are believed to be part of a conspiracy to torment the local minister, Harry Forbes, who was a zealous extremist who had a fear of witchcraft. And for a woman who would not have been taught to read or write, she was extremely eloquent. Her first confession described an encounter with the devil in the church at night, where she renounced her baptism and the devil put his mark on her shoulder before sucking her blood from it. Other meetings took place at several locations, where she recounted having sexual intercourse with the devil, who she described as a very cold and rough but great man. She detailed his appearance as having forked and cloven feet that were sometimes covered with shoes or boots. Details were given of taking a child's body from a grave and spoiling crops, along with information about covens and where they danced. The coven ate and drank the best of food at houses they reached by flying through the air on magical horses and entered through the windows, where they were entertained by the Queen of the Fairies in her home at Downey Hill, which was filled with water bowls that frightened Isabelle. She claimed to have made clay figures of the male offspring of the owner of her land to cause them suffering or death, and that she had assumed the form of a jackdaw bird with other members of the coven who had transformed into animals like cats and hares. Some parts of her testimony, such as her description of the King and Queen of the Fairies, has been cut short when the notaries have just noted, etc., because they were unable to keep pace with the volume of information being narrated to them. A little over 2 weeks later, on May 3rd, Isabelle's second confession was transcribed. She expanded on details about the coven by providing the nicknames of its members and as many of the spirits that waited on them as she could remember, including her own servant spirit, whom she called Red River, who dressed all in black. Claims included once again having the ability to transform into animals, with the individual chance used supplied. Over the duration of all of her confessions, a total of 27 benevolent or malevolent chants were given, more than in any other British witchcraft case. She testified that the devil handmade elf arrows that were then enhanced by small, roughly spoken elf boys. The devil allocated a number of arrows to each coven member with instructions that they were to be fired in his name. If the intended target, human or animal, was touched by the arrow, she claimed that they would pass, even if wearing protective armor. Spells used to inflict illness and torment on local minister Harry Forbes were also described. On May 15th, Isabelle was brought before her interrogators for a third time. Same as her first two confessions, the transcript begins by detailing her pact with the devil. Taking the information she provided previously about the elf arrows a step further, she revealed the names of those whose lives she had ended, along with supplying names of other coven members with details of who they had unalived. She described an instance where the devil had sent her to run an errand disguised as a hare, and how, well, in that form, she was chased by a pack of dogs until she was able to utter the chant to transform herself back into a human. She mentioned that while dogs could not kill her in that disguise, any marks sustained would still show after returning to human form. Descriptions of dining with the devil, along with salacious details concerning sexual relations with said devil, and broad characteristics of his were chronicled. The fourth and final confession on May 27th was mainly to confirm the three previous testimonies and an attempt to elicit more information about the members of the coven. After the 6 weeks that it took to record her testimonies, the panel of interrogators believed they had enough proof to request a trial from the Privy Council, which was granted. While there is no official record of the exact trial outcome, it is believed that Isabelle would have been found guilty and, following the verdict, would have been transported by cart to Gallows Hill, where she would have been subject to a public strangulation and burning. The posthumous burning to ensure that she couldn't haunt the community from beyond her grave. Granted, locals to the area claim that she is the Green Lady that can be seen haunting them to this day. Finally, in first place, we have the only male witch on this list, Grigory Rasputin. Close family friend of the last royal Russian family, he was originally introduced to them as a faith healer who could aid their only son, Alexei, who suffered from hemophilia. A self-described mystic and holy man, he was a figure of much debate amongst the royal court, with some describing him as a visionary and prophet, others as a charlatan and scam artist. Historians believe that his scandalous reputation and influence over the Romanovs helped to discredit and overthrow the family. Having taken many pilgrimages to holy monasteries, he developed a reputation as a reverent holy man, gaining a small circle of followers who believed in his miracles, and began leading private prayer meetings, much to the scorn and suspicion of villagers and priests. It was rumored that female followers were ceremonially washing him before each meeting, that the group sang strange songs, and even that they had joined a religious sect whose rituals were rumored to include self-flagellation and sexual orgies. Word of Rasputin's activity and charisma began to spread in Siberia during the early 1900s, where he developed many friendships with high-ranking religious leaders, eventually leading to his introduction to the royal family. It's not certain when Rasputin first acted as Alexei's healer, with the earliest record on date being when he was summoned by Alexandra to pray for Alexei when he had an internal hemorrhage in the spring of 1907, with the young royal healing by the next morning. Due to his closeness with the family, family, Rasputin was allowed intimate access in situations that governesses to the children described as inappropriate. One governess in particular was released from her position simply for voicing her concerns about Rasputin being allowed around the children while they were clad in nothing but their nightgown. Another of the nursery governesses claimed in the spring of 1910 that she was seduced into sexual acts against her will by Rasputin, having originally been a devotee of him but was later disillusioned. The Empress refused to believe her and said that everything Rasputin does is holy, later dismissing the governess. It was whispered in society that Rasputin had seduced not only the Tsarina, but also the 4 young Grand Duchesses. Rasputin had released passionate letters written to him by the Tsarina and the 4 young Grand Duchesses that throughout society fueled the rumors. In 1916, a group of nobles led by Prince Felix Yusupov banded together, deciding to assassinate the holy man for his influence over Alexandria and her family. It is said that the prince invited Rasputin to his place shortly after midnight, where he offered the man tea and cakes, which had been laced with cyanide. Rasputin initially refused the cakes, but then began to eat them, and to Felix's surprise, appeared unaffected by the poison. Rasputin then asked for wine, which had also been poisoned, and drank 3 glasses, but still showed no sign of distress. At around 2:30 in the morning, Felix excused himself to go upstairs, where his fellow conspirators were waiting. He grabbed a revolver and returned to the basement, telling Rasputin that he'd better look at the crucifix and say a prayer, referring to the crucifix in the room, and then shot him once in the chest. Rasputin leapt up from the bullet and attacked Felix, who freed himself with some effort and fled upstairs. Rasputin then followed Felix outdoors, where he was shot once again and collapsed into a snowbank. The group of men then wrapped his body in cloth, drove it to the Petrovsky Bridge, and dropped it into the Malaya Nevka River.
Number 2. The Blair Witch. Perhaps one of the most pervasive witches in pop culture after the Wicked Witch of the West, the Scourge of Maryland, the Blair Witch. Perhaps you saw the very successful 1999 documentary regarding her legend, or maybe you saw one of the 2 middling sequels. According to legends, she haunts the Black Hills forest near the town of Burkittsville, Maryland. The local folklore states that in the 18th century, a woman named Ellie Kedward was accused of practicing witchcraft. She was chased and exiled out of the township of Blair and condemned to live in the woods, hence the Blair Witch. It's believed that she died out in the surrounding forests in the harsh winter of 1785, but it's also said that she placed a curse on the town moments before her death, vowing to seek revenge on the townspeople and their descendants for generations. And not to split hairs here, but that does actually kind of sound like she was a witch. I'm not saying it was justified in exiling a woman out of her town, just that placing a hex on a town definitely sounds like witchcraft, and I can understand where they were coming from. I'm just trying to understand the scenario, okay? I'm divorced from it. I'm not part of it. I'm just trying to understand it. From here, the legends of Kedward grew into the larger-than-life figure, the Blair Witch. Various disturbing events were attributed to the Blair Witch. Mysterious disappearances, people being lured away into the woods, supernatural phenomena, camera crews disappearing in forests, reports of finding strange hex bags in the surrounding woods filled with strange runes and symbols and remnants of people, hair, teeth, for her to perform wicked rituals. Now, it goes without saying, unless you firmly believed the marketing campaign of the 1999 film, the Blair Witch Project is obviously a movie. While they say it's based on the real story of Ellie Kedward, there is no record of a Blair Township ever having existed. Almost certainly, the Blair Witch's story is inspired in large swaths by the Bell Witch, who we talked about earlier. Although in a kind of unique case, back in the day when the Blair Witch did come out, its marketing was so effective, and in this sort of like pre-early internet area, there were several people who did think it was real. It was a cast of completely unknown actors by a team no one had ever heard of. And on some level, I don't know, maybe to get esoteric with it, what makes an urban legend real? Just us believing in it, right? Do you believe the other 4 stories I've told you more? They're no less fictional. My only source was the internet for all of those. So, I'm just saying, open mind. Number 1, La Bruja de Cachiche. And our final witch for today is going to be La Bruja de Cachiche, a well-known urban legend from Peru, specifically from the coastal town of Cachiche near the city of Ica. The legend revolves around a reputed witch who lived during the colonial era. According to legend, La Bruja de Cachiche was an enigmatic woman with exceptional powers and knowledge of witchcraft. She was believed to possess both healing abilities and the abilities to cast curses. She multi-spec'd. It was said that she used various herbs, potions, and rituals to perform her magic. Now, one of the most interesting aspects of this legend is this belief that La Bruja de Cachiche had a physical deformity, specifically a hunchback. And if there's one thing we love in an urban legend, it's a bit of a physical deformity. It makes it that much more believable and scary. Because someone conventionally unattractive is way scarier than not. Don't blame me, blame our Western views on beauty. I didn't write them, I just perpetuate them. Over time, the legend of La Bruja de Cachiche became intertwined with the history and culture of the town of Cachiche. Local residents and visitors began associating certain landmarks and natural phenomena with their presence. For example, there's a famous gnarled and twisted tree called the Witch's Tree that is said to have been her gathering place. Today, Cachiche has embraced the legend of La Bruja de Cachiche as part of its heritage. The town has a statue of the witch, and there are various festivals and events dedicated to her, and I guarantee you no party goes even half as hard as a party celebrating a local witch. Oh my god, imagine the cauldrons do. The legend has also become a popular tourist attraction, drawing visitors who are interested in the occult, folklore, and statues.